in November last year, I decided to write a little book. It's called How Does She Do It? The question I get asked all the time from people, and it's so funny because I've spent my whole life trying to find a work-life balance, and I'm sure many people on this call can relate to it. I always feel like I'm doing 3 or 4 really, really bad jobs. So I thought, let me just start off with a little excerpt from my book and then go into some strategies and tips that I think will benefit from you. So it goes as follows. When I stand up and present a talk, the first thing I do is tell the audience that I don't have all my ducks in a row and that I'm not the poster girl for balance or success. I will then share a story or two about my life to reveal my flaws. For instance, there's the time I cooked chicken schnitzels for dinner and my daughter Lexi gobbled up hers, wondering why it was crunchy. It was still frozen. Lexi, I once was in such a hurry to get Hannah to school that I drove out the garage with such speed, just missing my laptop that was leaning against my car tire, driving over her school bags and her iPad in my haste, dragging them down the driveway behind the car. Or there was the time when I was driving Hannah and Lexi home from school. Lexi had been eating a bright red lollipop, and she threw it in the air. It went up, but it never came down, and nobody could find it. As I walked into the supermarket, one child in each hand, feeling like a ramp supermodel in my new work outfit, the car guard called me loudly. He said, Madam, there's a lolly on your bum. How embarrassing. I could go on. I am a joke. I don't know if any of you feel like that, but I find that sometimes people ask me how I am, and I end up going, I'm hectic, I'm stressed, I'm tired, I'm exhausted. And, so often people introduce me at speeches and they go, she sounds like she's got it together. And I think my purpose in writing this book, How Does She Do It?, is to say that most of us are not doing it that well at all, but that's okay. I think we are so hard on ourselves. For years, every January I start my year and I go, what are my goals? And every year it's to be more balanced. And I've done a little bit of research into this. I've really tried to find out, what does a balance mean? Because I think so many of us are not enjoying the journey because we are shoulding all the time. We feel we should do this, we should do that. And it's funny, I always joke that when Hannah, my oldest daughter, who's now 21, but that when she was up until 3, she thought her name was Quickly, because I'd say quickly in the car, quickly out the bath. And she'd go, yes, mom, and try and rush. And I think the second one, Lexi, when she was born, I think she thought her name was Not Now. And I don't know if any of you can relate to that. But I think for me, one thing I've realized as an entrepreneur, I also head up a charity foundation called the Robin Hood Foundation. I'm a motivational speaker. I have 2 children. I'm married. Today is actually my 27th wedding anniversary. And I feel I've got all these commitments, and yet I wish I had a wife. I don't know if any of you feel like that. I wish there was I could clone myself so that I could actually achieve what I need to do. And I think sometimes we are so hard on ourselves, trying to do so much in a day, every single day. And something I read recently was many of us are unaware of our relation to time and what balance means. I am a chrono optimist, so I happily underestimate or overestimate what I can do in a day, and I happily underestimate how long anything takes. So I think, well, I'll just quickly write a speech, and I wonder why 2.5 hours have gone by, thinking that it might take 10 minutes, which it never does. And I think for many of us, work-life balance is a fantasy. I also think some of us believe that a balance is like a seesaw. It should be half work, half life and family, and it never ever works like that. I think for most of us, if we are entrepreneurs, the lion's share of our time is spent working, and it is what it is. But I think it's about how do we put a cap on that amount of time working, and then what do we do with the rest of the time? So I think balance is achieved over time. It's not a balance per day. So I think it's to look at how have I been in this last quarter? How have I been this year? Rather than how have I achieved today? So I find for me, my weekdays are incredibly busy. Weekends I decompress. So I think the key is to remain fluid when we're trying to find a balance. It's about having flexibility to get things done in our professional life, obviously in our business, while also still trying to have the time and the energy to enjoy our personal life. There's nothing worse than arriving on Friday night. I don't know if any of you can relate. Friday night, I find I'm lying on my couch, watching The Bachelor, having wine, thinking I wish I had a life, And I think so many of us feel that we give our all to our work and our professional side, And then the little bits that are left are given to the people that are nearest and dearest to us. And I call that the pre-sucked mango syndrome. Every day we start out like a beautiful ripe mango, and we let everybody have a bite of us. And by the end of the day, there's just a few little hairs hanging on, and we wonder why we don't feel great. So I think the question to ask is, why is it so hard to get a work-life balance? Most of our parents and grandparents, it was never, ever even a conversation. It was never a challenge. For me, I think the world is speeding up and is becoming infinitely more complex. I think that's number one. Number two, a lot of us are doing remote work or hybrid work. And in the last 2 years, I think what we found is that we have a never-ending workday. Our work is not done. So what happens is we've had this merging of work and life, and it's led to a blurring of the lines and a fuzziness. And the relationship between work and home is now kind of merged together. And sometimes we've forgotten what boundaries to have. When do I stop working? When do I start living? But many of us, what we would do is we would very quickly spend time at night doing work, but very seldom would we feel comfortable spending time at work doing family or life. And I think sometimes that needs to change a bit. The other thing that's contributed to us feeling challenged in the area of the work-life balance is increase in technology. So we've got all these apps, we've got all these social media platforms, we've got so many tools and technologies to help us cope. But I think for many of us, it's actually causing a lot more stress, and it's taking so much time. So for instance, this morning, I was checking my WhatsApps. I had so many WhatsApps from various groups and individuals. I had loads of emails. On LinkedIn, I've got messages, people wanting to connect with me because I'm in recruitment. It's a huge platform. And then what about Instagram, Facebook? It's kind of quite consuming, I think, in terms of the technology. So I think what's happened is we are always available and we are always distracted. And we all understand that multi-skilling actually makes you 10% less effective. So imagine now you're sitting here, you're trying to get work done, and your WhatsApps are going, or your email notifications. That distraction is also making you less effective and less efficient. And then I think we are spending more time on work and more time on childcare for those of us who have children. And we're trying to be great parents. We're trying to do a good job. And I think, that saying that the struggle is real. Well, I think the juggle is real. For many of us, it's hard. It's hard. Every day is a challenge to try and do the best we can. And I also think for many of us, we wear many hats. Like I said, I have a charity, I'm a speaker, I'm a parent, I'm a wife, a sister, a daughter. Those lists go on and on and on. But I think the heaviest one and the most demanding one is the business hat. And if we are running successful businesses, or even if we're just trying to survive in this crazy time that we're living in, it's a very, very big, heavy hat. And sometimes we don't know when to take it off, or we keep wearing it the whole time. And I think it's about boundaries as well. So I read a survey, in a recent survey, 94% of working professionals reported working more than 50 hours a week. I know many, many entrepreneurs who brandish their workaholism as a badge of honor. Oh, I work 60 hours a week. I work 70 hours a week. I work 15 hours a day. Apparently, after 50 hours a week, we become incredibly unproductive. So I would encourage you to get your working hours down as much as possible. And I'm going to share a few tips on that as well. And as I said, we've got to stop multitasking. I really believe there's a huge power in focus. And I love that saying, you cannot ride two horses with only one backside. So I think it's so true. We want to focus on getting this right, and this right. A question I ask myself every morning when I wake up is, what is the one thing that I need to do today that will push the lever the most? What is the one thing that will make today great? Years ago, I used to wake up in the morning and I'd literally create terror in my own mind and create stress, because I'd wake up with this rhetoric going through my mind. I'm so busy. I have so much to do. And it's true. We all are. But that's not a helpful way to work. So today I sat there, I have loads to do. And I asked myself, what is the one thing? So for me today, luckily for you, the one thing is to do this talk well, to deliver a talk that hopefully is not just entertaining, but that could possibly be a game changer for some of you. And if that is done, then my job is done today. I can do other things, but it's not this huge pressure that I've got to keep busy all the time. And many of us are addicted to busy. So I think, question I like to ask myself every day is, as I'm looking at the tasks I have, all the myriad of tasks, is to ask myself, is what I'm doing taking me closer to my goal or further away from it? Is this pushing the lever the most? So often we are so busy doing that we haven't actually prioritized, and we haven't actually worked out, is this the thing I should be doing? So I wanted to talk to you about how to get a balance in the workplace. Some of you here might not be the owners. You might be working for somebody. And I realize when you have a job, you often have less autonomy, less flexibility. But I think here's a few tips that have worked for me, and they've worked for people that I've coached. So I thought I'd share them. I also think the one thing is reduce the pressure to accomplish a perfect work-life balance. Accept that there is no perfect work-life balance. I think that's the one thing. Almost give yourself permission to be imperfect. And I love that quote. It says, strive for progress, not perfection. So if you can say, well, and last year I was not at all balanced. I was a workaholic. I was exhausted all the time. I didn't look after myself. That's okay. This year I have a greater consciousness, I have a greater awareness, and I'm going to focus more on my balance in life. And then also stop stressing about the balance, whether you've got it right, and focus more on your fulfillment. Considering over an extended view, it's not just, yesterday I worked 15 hours, I'm not balanced. Well, actually, yesterday I worked 15 hours, but the whole weekend I rested and played and relaxed. Okay, so it's give and take. I think that's an important thing. I also think work-life balance encompasses everything you do, and it's everything that goes into a well-lived life. So the question is, am I living a well-lived life? Or am I one of those people who's postponing happiness and joy for one day when the business is better, when I have more money, when the kids are grown up? How many people do that? For those of you who have a job, it's so easy to blame your employer, to say, well, Cindy, it's easy for you to say you run your own business. But for me, it's difficult because my boss won't let me, or the company culture won't let me. But I think the important thing is, from this discussion today, what can you control? What are the things that you can do or stop doing or continue doing that are going to help you create a more balanced life, a more joyful life, and a more well-lived life? So the first thing, and I know we all know this one, is to say no. Say no to anything that doesn't further your goals. I think we've got to learn to become comfortable disappointing other people for the furtherance of our own goals. And I have battled my entire life with this. I'm such a people pleaser. People ask me to do things, even people I don't like. I go, yes, sure, I'll do it. And then I kick myself afterwards and I go, why is my diary so busy? So often we are doing things for other people that we really don't want to do. And I think assertiveness is part of being an adult, is to say, you know what is in my work day, what is in my life that needs to go? I'll give you an example. I once coached a lady who had such road rage. On her way to work, on her way home from work, she said to me she was in a state. And what we worked out is she actually didn't have road rage. She was angry that she hosted a lift club. She was driving people around from her community and taking them to work and then taking them home. The day she decided to cancel her lift club and just drive herself, she said all road rage disappeared. Isn't that amazing? So sometimes we've got these things in our lives that are creating tremendous despair and frustration, and we are tolerating them. So I think a question to ask is, what do I need to say no to? Who do I need to say no to? And then there's a lovely saying that I use almost every day of my life: teach people how to treat you. Sometimes you are getting the result of the way you've allowed people to treat you. So you might feel like everyone takes advantage of me. That's because you've never said no and you've been a doormat. So maybe now's the time to say, from this day onwards, I'm saying no to the following. These are my boundaries. And I'll give you examples. So knowing when to stop working. I know that a lot of bosses will send their staff emails over the weekend with no expectation of the staff doing the work, the staff member doing the work or even responding. But that employee has said, oh no, I have to. Or even entrepreneurs, my client emailed me at 9 at night, I have to respond. Said who? And what if you stopped doing that? What if you just didn't respond? And then your client says to you the next day, I emailed you, it was urgent. And I love that saying, urgency, really? Is it really urgent? For whom? And I have another saying that I think I'd love to share with you. Don't put your urgency on my agenda. So often we have chaos in our lives. We are so stressed, but that's because we've said, oh, this client says it's urgent. Well, really, is it urgent? So often it's not urgent, and we just respond to the urgency. So if you can get into a situation where you go, it is after hours, I won't respond to that email. At what time of night is your cell phone off? I know people who literally kiss their phones good night and good morning, and they don't do that to their family. 1 hour before bed, no emails, no cell phone. 1 hour in the morning. For me, I try by 7 o'clock at night, the phone's gone. And the first hour of the morning, I don't even look at it. Nothing seems to be that important to me. So I think it's so important. So work out some boundaries. What will you do? What won't you do? And when won't you do those things? I think there's such a blur. I know people who are working from the time they get up to the time they go to bed, and they're wondering why they don't feel balanced. So I think that's important. The other thing is to have a to-do list. I believe one list, one life. But for years, I made the mistake of constantly feeling this huge pressure to, I've got 50 things on the list. Just because I have 50 things on the list doesn't mean I have to do 50 things. Ask yourself, what is the one thing? What are the 3 things, the 5 things? So often we've got all these things on the list, and they're just creating so much weight and pressure on us. So I think that's so important. And then something I've realized is some items on your lists are nice to have in the perfect life, but you're not living the perfect life. So take them off. Or make a little list, a random list of one day when I have time, and put them there. You might find that in a year or in 6 months, you look at that and you go, really, that was not important at all. And then rushing. So many of us are not balanced because we are rushing the whole time. And I read a quote, it says, I have so much to do, I may as well take my time. So many of us feel that we have to work faster and faster and not take breaks, because that's the way to get through work. But it's really the quickest way to burn out. So I would encourage you to take breaks. And I read about a study where they reckon that people go from full focus to psychological fatigue within 90 minutes. So every 90 minutes, try and take a break, even if it's 5, 10, or 15 minutes, just to get away from your desk, walk around, get some fresh air, get the blood pumping. I think that's so important. Take your lunch breaks. So many people feel that they are the stars of the show because they never take a lunch break. And then I read a statistic that a US study said that 52% of employees had unused holiday days at the end of the year, which they forfeited. Isn't that crazy? Take your leave. And especially if you run a business, take your leave. You deserve it. You need it. You need more leave than the average person. Many of us also battle to delegate. We sit there and go, I have to do it. I so often believe that it has to be done. It doesn't mean I have to do it. So look around you. Who are the resources that you can call on? And ask yourself, is this job worth my hourly rate? If you own the business, if you're the manager and you're doing jobs beneath your pay grade, you're actually robbing the company. You're actually doing a job which could be done by somebody who's a lot cheaper than you. And I think that's important. But an important thing about balance, I meet so many people who say, I'm not balanced. But the reason they're not balanced is they don't love what they do. A few years ago, I heard about the concept called an ikigai. It's a Korean term, and it's an intersection of 4 things. And I wanted to ask you the question, do you have these 4 things in your life? The one is, I do work that I love. So I get up every morning and I'm actually fundamentally happy to do what I do. The second thing is, I do work that I'm incredibly good at. I'm working to my strengths. I think that's so important. So many people are doing things that they hate every day. No wonder if you're doing stuff you hate every day, you're going to start hating your life or your job. The third thing is the world needs what I've got. There's actually a market need for it. And then the fourth thing is the world is prepared to pay for this thing that I do. So for me, I love motivational speaking. Hopefully I'm good at it. Hopefully I obviously love doing it. Hopefully the world needs it and is prepared to pay. So a day where I do motivational speaking is one of my best days. Ask yourself, look back on the last 2 years. Have the good days outweighed the bad? If not, how do you get to work in your strengths? You will never become great by working in your weaknesses. And I know so many people, their strategy in life is, let me prop up this weakness. Let me spend all my time on overcoming this weakness. All the motivation theory and psychology says, no, don't do that. Focus on your X factor. Focus on that thing that you were born to do, that thing that you do so well that when you do it, time flies. That is what joy is. And I think too many people are not experiencing that. The next piece of advice about work is to take the day off. I read a book about 2 years ago called Take the Day Off. And the recommendation was that you have a 24-hour period every week where you don't work. You don't do what you deem work. Obviously, you might have to still make meals and clean the house and do something. But the point is to take a full 24-hour break. And as I say, many people are burnt out because they believe that they need to keep on. And you're not a robot. You're not a machine. Your body needs it. I think the other thing as well is to work out when your energy is at its most. So when are you at your best? So for instance, most people are really, really good between say 9 and 12 in the morning. That is when you should do the intellectually challenging work. I think that's so important. Do that thing that maybe you find hardest to do, that thing that you've been postponing. And remember procrastination. I only learned this a few years ago. What do we procrastinate on? We procrastinate on things that we don't understand, things that we fear, and things that we don't like doing. So if you looked at your pile of things that you procrastinate on, it's bound to be due to fear, not enjoying it, or not understanding it. And then get organized. I think it's so important. I believe in Sunday night planning, plan your week. And then when you plan your week, you've got a list, work out who you're going to delegate what to, work out who you're going to, for me, I've even outsourced to a virtual assistant because there's certain things that I just don't want to do and they're not providing joy. And I've realized I'd rather pay a virtual assistant a decent rate to do things that I don't want to do. It makes me so happy to pay that person to do those terrible jobs for me. And then reduce distractions and interruptions. Sometimes at work, we have open plan offices, we've got chatty colleagues, but we've got constant phone calls. Work out how those distractions and interruptions are impacting your productivity. It's very hard to get the right things done when we are allowing all these things to take place. And sometimes it might mean an assertive conversation with a colleague to say, you can't come to my desk every 5 minutes, or to a family member to say, stop WhatsApping me every day. I think that's so important. And then there's something called the Eisenhower Matrix. We've all seen it. That's an urgent, important, not urgent, not important. Sometimes when I'm feeling overwhelmed at work, I look at my work and I go, is this urgent? Is this important? And then often the urgent stuff, it's stuff that somebody else can do, or it's urgent for somebody else and not for me. I've also worked out that I have an overdeveloped sense of urgency. I honestly believe everything's urgent. And sometimes a reality check for myself is to ask myself, or to tell myself, you're not an air traffic controller or a paramedic. It's not urgent. And sometimes that just literally gives me permission to start breathing again. I also want to talk to you about tips on how you can get a balance at life and at home and through the family. Because so many people, they come home, they've had a very hard day at the office, they come home and then they have a very hard day at home. And there's a few insights that I have that I think I'd like to share with you. Number one is to drop your standards. I remember watching a motivational speaker the one day, and she said, the problem is she's deteriorating faster than she can lower her standards. And I thought it was hysterical. But I think so many of us are holding ourselves to such high, unrealistic standards. So so to me, perfectionism is not a good quality. As a recruiter, I often interview people and I say, what is your greatest strength? And so often people say, I'm a perfectionist. And I look at them with absolute disdain. That is not a great quality. And I tell you why. It is a great quality if you are a plastic surgeon or if you're a jeweler. But if you're doing general work or, running a business, I think sometimes in life we are trying to do perfectly that which should be done at 80% or 90%. And that's where we get the fatigue. I'm trying harder to make this perfect. And there's a concept called GET-MO, good enough to move on. Isn't that liberating? So, I prepared this speech. I could have done it better. I could have, but it's good enough to move on. In life, where are you aiming for perfection when you could aim for Getmo? Is there an area where you actually are striving so hard to do something beautifully that maybe shouldn't even be done at all, or it shouldn't be done by you? I'll give you an example of a friend. She's 80 years old. It's an old family friend of ours. She spoke to me the one day and she said, Cindy, you won't believe what I did. She said, I raised my boys. She had 3 boys. And she said, for 20 odd years, every single day, she washed their sheets. She washed and ironed their sheets and pajamas. These 3 dirty little boys, you can imagine. So imagine how many years of her life she spent washing and ironing sheets and pajamas when they didn't need to be washed every day, and they certainly didn't need to be ironed. Is there an area in your life where you are washing and ironing the sheets and pajamas? Imagine that huge sense of relief you could feel if you could just exhale and say, I don't have to do that anymore. How many of us have realized that we don't have to drive to the office every day? Wow, what a huge relief. But guess what's happening? We are being pulled back into the previous norm. What is it about the last 2 years that was abnormal that was actually helpful? And what was it about life before that we need to keep keep into our keep as practices? So many of us are starting to rush again. We have no margin and we are just cramming more and more and more. Many of us feel we need to overcompensate for the last 2 quiet, stodgy, depressed years. I think we need to pace ourselves. And my homeopath always used to say to me, calm down, slow down. Life is a marathon, not a sprint. We've got to run a long race, not a short, fast race. So I think perfectionism has to go. So when we think, oh my gosh, I've got so many things to do, or if you look at your to-do list and you question yourself, I want you to ask yourself, I want you to be a rebel and ask yourself, so what? So what if I don't do it? Cross it out. Ask yourself, who cares? Who really cares? You might just find that you're doing a whole bunch of stuff because you've always done it. You haven't questioned why you do it, or you're doing stuff too often that could be done less often, or you're doing stuff to such a high standard it doesn't have to be perfect. So I think for me, just look at those areas of perfectionism. You might be putting in an inordinate amount of stress on yourself that needn't be there in the first place. The second thing is stop the guilt. As a working mom, I always said that, being a working mom was a combination of exhaustion and guilt. So I was always tired, always feeling like I was doing a bad job. When I was at the office, I'd feel guilty that my children were at the daycare. When I went to the daycare, I'd feel guilty that I was leaving my office. And I think so often that guilt is our own voice in our head. It's nobody else's. So own your space. If you are a business owner, or if you have autonomy and flexibility, be comfortable with it. Stop the guilt, because it's only hurting you. And I love that saying, wherever you are, be there. I know that I've often tried to be at the sports day, but now trying to email on my phone. And it's that moment where your child looks at you and you're on the phone and their little crestfallen face, things like that, I just think are unforgivable. We don't forgive ourselves for those moments. And, I think also work out, for instance, if you're doing work that's highly problem solving, brainstorming and high energy work, you might find you can only actually do 5 good hours a day, and that might be okay. So I also think the other thing is share responsibilities, and that's at home. I remember once coaching a lady and she looked haggard. She said to me, Cindy, I'm exhausted. I get up at 4:30 in the morning. I have to put the washing on. I make sandwiches for my children. And she carried on. And I asked her, how old are your children? And she said, the one's 17 and the one's 15. I said, stop making sandwiches. Let them make their sandwiches. And something I've learned is that, we need to stop being helicopter parents. If any of you on this call are parents, I remember a conversation with a psychologist who said the best thing you can do if you want independent children is to be a lazy parent. Stop doing things for them. And there's a beautiful mantra in life that I've recently learned. Never do for somebody something which they can do for themselves. All you are doing is creating dependence. And sometimes we do it out of love, or we did it when they were little and they needed us to do it, but we need to stop. So I would encourage you to have family meetings. I see so many families where one person is carrying the brunt of the work, and it's not acceptable. So I would say, instead of sitting there and saying, okay, you do the rubbish on a Monday, or you do, you clean the bins. What about saying your responsibility is to do this, or to work in this section of the house? So many people are delegating tasks and then having to follow up. I think an important thing is to work out what are the responsibilities, and look, is it a fair? So it takes a lot of honesty, it takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of assertiveness. But, it's funny, for years, one of my top values in life was harmony. I just wanted harmony. I wanted everyone to be at peace. So I'd say, oh, it's okay, I'll do it. And then about 2 years ago, I made a conscious decision that harmony wasn't going to be my top value, but that courage was. And it's so funny, since I decided to be courageous, I'm so much happier, because I'm not tolerating things that I shouldn't tolerate. I'm not letting people get away with taking advantage of my good nature. So in any area of your life where you feel people are taking advantage, whether it's a client, a staff member, your boss, your family, your husband, your wife, your children, now is the time to have an assertive conversation to say, no more. Let's paint a picture of how this will be. And even ask them the question, if you were in my shoes, how would you feel? I'm sure many, many people would agree that that's not fair. Fairness is so important. And then I also think, stop comparing. So many of us go, oh my gosh, that person on social media, look, they're having another holiday. Oh my gosh, they're having a date night, or that person's done this, or that person baked a cake for their child's party and it's perfect. Stop comparing. This is your race. So I don't put notes in lunch boxes. I cook terribly. And as you saw by the frozen schnitzel story, but I'm okay with that. And I think it just allows so much guilt off your plate. Where are the areas where you can lower your standards? Stop comparing. I don't do lunches, notes in the lunchbox. I don't even do lunch boxes. And I'm okay with that. My family are okay with that. I think stop demonizing people who have actually got the balance right, or who have learned how to create strong boundaries for themselves. And remember, we teach people how to treat us. And now certain people who've taken full advantage. Maybe today is the day to draw that line in the sand and say no more. And then I think it's so important to be kinder to yourself. So many of us, we're flogging a dead horse. We literally are so hard on ourselves that if we carried on the way we do, we might not be here in 5 years' time. We are so exhausted, we are so stressed, and we're so chronically fatigued. Something has to change. And then I also think that on that subject of saying no, if we have FOMO, we all have that fear of missing out. Not all of us, but many of us do. I do. What I've learned to do is, instead of jumping and saying yes, 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 saying give it 24 hours, think on it, and then say yes or no. And then the last few minutes, I just want to spend 5 minutes on self-care. A lot of people poo-poo this topic. They think, oh, it seems like you have to go to the spa, and there's a saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. But so many of us, we are giving to others, and we are emotionally bankrupt. We have absolutely nothing left. And we wonder why we don't have compassion, or why we find it hard to be patient and kind and loving. It's because we haven't been patient and kind and loving to ourselves. So for me, self-care isn't about going to the spa. It shouldn't feel like anything you should do or have to do, but it's stuff that you need, and the stuff you want. So there's a beautiful saying, your day is your life in miniature. I can honestly tell you, if I spend a day with you, I can pretty accurately predict what your life is going to turn out to be like. So many of us, we are doing the wrong things. The habits we have are not helping us. So I would encourage you to maybe do a little analysis of your habits, of your daily habits. How do you live your life? Is it working for you? And the superpower at the moment is your habits. There's in the literature on successful people, it's like, if you've got good habits, you're going to have a good life. If you've got bad habits, it's going to ultimately lead to a bad life. And they always say, do you want the pain of discipline? That's the present pain. I'm going through discipline now, or the pain of regret, the pain of later having the results of what you're doing now. So for me, I think the habits that I want to encourage you are, self-care and balance. It's not about what you do once in a while, but it's what you do on a regular basis. So early to bed, early to rise. We all understand that. So many people are sleep deprived. They're depressed. If we don't get enough quality sleep, we will be depressed. Could you go to bed an hour earlier? Could you, or half an hour earlier, could you move away from technology 1 hour before bedtime? Could you have early rising? We all know the book, The 5 a.m. Club, but that first hour of the day is where the magic happens. Most of us are missing it because we are pushing snooze, or we wake up and we're onto social media. Let your priorities prevail first rather than letting the world in. What about moving? They say sitting is the new smoking. So many of us are sitting. We are literally not even moving. Even if between every Zoom call, you literally zoom around your house, you do a press up, you walk around, get out in nature. But so many of us sit in an office, we sit in meetings, we sit in the car, and we wonder why we feel sluggish and uninspired. So we need to move, walk wherever you can. Breathing. When last did you take 5 deep breaths? Could you schedule that on your phone 5 times a day? Believe me, you'll start thinking better. So many of us feel foggy. We think, have I got COVID? Is it COVID fog? It's actually not. We're just not moving. We're not breathing. Many of us are dehydrated. We're having coffee after coffee after coffee, and we wonder why we're not feeling inspired. We need loads and loads of water in order to not feel dehydrated. Stretching. Many of us are crouched over our computers, and we wonder why we're not as supple and flexible as we used to be. Have you thought of getting a massage on a weekly basis, or every second week, or once a month? You know, so many of us, we would do that for other people, but we wouldn't do it for ourselves. And as I said, getting out in nature. And there's a thing called grounding, where you sit in the soil and you actually sit on the grass and you actually feel the soil. Apparently, spending time in the soil or even on grass barefoot reduces inflammation and reduces anxiety. Another thing is mindfulness. Even doing a 2-minute mindfulness of saying, I'm sitting here, what do I feel and what do I hear? 2 senses. Just try that for 2 minutes. Many of us are in a terrible state of despair, depression, and anxiety. We are living entirely in our head. And I think so many of us need to just slow down and try and experience our body. Stop rushing, stop panicking, and stop stressing. I read a story of these frontiersmen who were going to colonize an area, and they arrived at this new land, and they got the local people, the tribal people, to come and take them. And they said, every day we're going to travel and we're going to get to this new area. Apparently a week or so into it, they'd been making great ground every single day. The local tribesmen said, no, we're not going. And the frontiersmen were, oh, what do you want? We have to go. We're on a mission. And these tribesmen said, you know what, we're waiting. We just have to wait for our souls to catch up to our bodies. And I wonder how many of us feel the same way. Our souls are not where our bodies are. What a pity to spend a whole life disconnected. Isn't that crazy? So I would encourage you to take a break from work. Even if you work from home, leave the room, go outside, go for a walk, take a shower, put the phone away, do something to create that split between work and life. Put some play in your day every day. Start having fun goals, things that these are the things I want to do. I've developed a little happiness list, and it's things like burning a candle, reading, having an afternoon nap, watching a funny show, spending time with a good friend, going for a run, walking by the beach. Most of these things don't cost money, and most of us are chronically deprived of fun. And Walt Disney had this beautiful question. He said, would the child you were be proud of the adult you've become? Sure, I don't know. So many of us are so boring. We're so dull. We're so serious. We are so intense. We just work. We don't have play. When last did you laugh so much? Self-care is about smiling. It's about laughing. It's about genuinely spending time with those people who actually make us feel happier. I think it's so, so important. And, you know, building relationships. I read a statistic I want to share with you. And it said a lack of strong relationships increases the risk of premature death from all causes by 50%. So not having close relationships is nearly as harmful as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Isn't that crazy? And then I think, yeah, let's find ways to lighten up. Let's just try and connect with people. Many of us over the last 2 years have become increasingly isolated and disconnected, and that's not good. Another thing I believe in is gratitude. Every day, finding a reason to be grateful. I journal it, I write it, I say it, I pray it. What are you grateful for? Because so many of us, our whole focus in life is on, you know, the shoulds and what we have to, and we have this heaviness about us. So, you know, just to finish off, my daughter Lexi and I were driving the one day, and there were all these clouds in the sky, And she said, Mommy, I love this. The one looks like a boat. The one looks like a sheep. And I said, oh, Lex, I used to do that when I was a little girl. And she said, why did you stop? And I kind of got all teary. And I was like, I don't know. I just grew up and I forgot. I forgot to do that. I forgot how to play. How many of us are just working our lives away? And we are not actually enjoying ourselves. We're not actually having a human experience. We are just machines. So I would encourage you, work-life balance, it's an enigma to every one of us. But I think the mindfulness of it is the first step, that awareness of something has to change. Do you want to live the next 5 years like the last 5 years? Do you like the results of your work-life balance that you've had? And remember, our happiness, 85% of our happiness comes from our relationships. Yet we spend 85% of our day working. So something has to change. Something has to change radically. And I think the last 2 years, many of us, what we've done is we've developed incredibly dangerous and damaging coping mechanisms. And maybe today is the time to say, is what I'm doing working for me? And is it sustainable? And will it ultimately lead to a healthy, happy, and successful future?